Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The topic of today's discussion is acid peptic disease, and majority of you will be familiar with the pathophysiology of acid peptic disease. And if I include the pathophysiology of acid peptic disease in my lecture, it will become very lengthy. So I will omit pathophysiology of acid peptic disease. Acid peptic disease. Peptic ulcer is a break in the gastric or duodenal mucosa that arises when the normal mucosal defensive factors are impaired or are overwhelmed by aggressive luminant factors such as acid or pepsin. By definition, ulcer extends through the muscularis mucosae and are usually over 5 mm in diameter. A lot of factors have been incriminated in the pathophysiology of acid peptic disease, and these may constitute: on the top, Helicobacter pylori infection; second, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs; and third, hypersecretory states such as Zollinger-Ellison syndrome. Helicobacter pylori infection, it is now become very prevalent all over the world. Helicobacter pylori is a ubiquitous gram-negative flagellate urease producing bacterium that has infected about 50% of the world population. It plays a major role in gastritis and upper peptic ulcer disease. It colonizes the mucus layer in the gastrometrium, but it also found in the duodenum in areas of gastric metaplasia. Helicobacter pylori is found in greatest numbers under the mucus layer in gastric pits, where it adheres specifically to gastric epithelial cells. As it is a has a flagella which aids in its movement in viscous secretions. Epidemiology. The prevalence of Helicobacter pylori is high in developing countries, about 80 to 90% of the population. Much lower, about 20 to 50% in developed countries. Infection rates are highest in lower income groups. Infection is usually acquired in childhood. Although the exact route of its is uncertain, it may be fecal, oral, or oral. The incidence increases with age, probably due to acquisition in childhood when hygiene was poor, rather than infection in adult life. Pathogenesis. The majority of the colonized population remain asymptomatic throughout their life. Helicobacter pylori is highly adapted to the stomach environment, exclusively colonizing gastric epithelium and inhabiting the mucus layer or just beneath it. It adheres by a number of adhesion molecules. Damage to the gastric epithelial cell is caused by the release of enzymes and the induction of apoptosis. The production of urease enables the conversion of urea to ammonium and chloride, which are directly cytotoxic. Ulcers are commonest when the infecting strain expresses CAGA, cytotoxic associated protein, or VACA, vacuolating toxin gene, secondary to a major pronounced inflammatory and immune response. Expression of CAGA and VACA is associated with higher induction of interleukin 8, a potent inhibitor of gastric inflammation. What will the results of infection with Helicobacter pylori? Number 1, enteral gastritis, peptic ulcer, both duodenum and gastric, and gastric carcinoma. Enteral gastritis, it is usually asymptomatic, although patients without ulcers do sometimes experience relief of dyspeptic symptoms after Helicobacter eradication. Chronic enteral gastritis causes hypergastrinemia due to gastrin release from enteral G cells. The subsequent increase in acid output is usually asymptomatic but can lead to duodenal ulceration. Duodenal ulcer, the prevalence of Helicobacter pylori infection in patients with duodenal ulceration is falling, and in the developing world is now between 50% and 75%, whereas duodenal ulceration was once rare in the absence of Helicobacter pylori infection. This has been attributed to a decrease in prevalence of the bacteria and an increase in non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug use. Eradication of infection improves ulcer healing and decreases the incidence of recurrence. Gastric ulcer. Gastric ulcers are associated with the gastritis affecting the body as well as the antrum of the stomach, that is pangastritis, causing parietal cell loss and reduced acid production. The ulcers are thought to occur because of reduction of gastric mucosa resistance due to cytokine production by the infection or perhaps to alterations in gastric mucus. Peptic ulcer disease. A peptic ulcer consists of a break in superficial epithelial cells penetrating down to the muscularis mucosae of either the stomach or the duodenum. There is a fibrous base and an increase in inflammatory cells. Erosions, by contrast, are superficial breaks in the mucosa alone. Most duodenal ulcers are found in the duodenal cap. The surrounding mucosa appears inflamed, hemorrhagic or friable, that is duodenitis. Gastric ulcers are most commonly seen on the lesser curvature near the incisura, but can be found in any part of the stomach. Epidemiology. Duodenal ulcers affect approximately 10% of the adult population and are 2 to 3 times more common than gastric ulcers. Ulcer rates are declining rapidly for younger men and increasing for older individuals, particularly women. Both duodenal ulcers and gastric ulcer are common in the elderly. There is considerable geographical variation, with peptic ulcer disease being more prevalent in developing countries related to the high Helicobacter pylori infection. In the developed world, the percentage of NSAID-induced peptic ulcers is increasing as the prevalence of Helicobacter pylori declines. What will be the clinical features? The characteristic feature of peptic ulcer is recurrent burning epigastric pain. If a patient points with a single finger to the epigastrium as the site of the pain, this is strongly suggestive of peptic ulcer disease. The relationship of the pain to the food is variable. The pain of duodenal ulcer classically occurs at night as well as during the day and is worse when the patient is hungry, but this is not reliable. The pain of both gastric and duodenal ulcers may be relieved by antacids. Nausea may accompany the pain. Vomiting is infrequent but can relieve the pain. Anorexia and weight loss may occur, particularly with gastric ulcers. Persistent or severe pain suggests complications such as penetration into the other organs. Back pain suggests a penetrating posterior ulcer. Severe ulceration can occasionally be symptomless, as many who present with acute ulcer bleeding or perforation have no preceding ulcer symptoms. On examination, epigastric tenderness is common. In the majority of the patients, clinical examination will be normal, but in patients with present with alarming symptoms such as recurrent vomitus, unexplained weight loss, odynophagia, dysphagia, and a family history of gastric ulcer disease. These patients should be especially screened. Diagnosis of Helicobacter pylori infection. Non-invasive methods. Serological tests detect IgG antibodies and are reasonably sensitive 90% and specificity is about 83%. IgG titers may take up to 1 year to fall by 50% after eradication therapy and therefore are not useful for confirming eradication or the presence of a current infection. Urea breath test. This is a quick and reliable test for Helicobacter pylori and can be used as a screening test. Patients swallow urea labeled with radioactive carbon. In subsequent 10 to 30 minutes, detection of isotope labeled carbon dioxide in exhaled breath indicate urea was split, that is, urease enzyme is present. The measurement of radioactive carbon dioxide in the breath after ingestion of radioactive carbon urea requires a mass spectrometer. The test is sensitive 90% and specificity has 96%. The sensitivity can be improved by ensuring the patient has not taken antibiotics in the 4 weeks prior and proton pump inhibitors in the 2 weeks before the test. Stool antigen test. This is beginning to supersede breath tests as the method with which to determine Helicobacter pylori status. A specific amino acid using monoclonal antibodies for the qualitative detection of Helicobacter pylori antigen is now widely available. The overall sensitivity is 97.6% with the specificity of 96%. It is useful in the diagnosis of Helicobacter pylori infection and for monitoring efficacy of eradication therapy. Patients should be off proton pump inhibitors for about 2 weeks but can continue with H2 receptor blockers. Invasive methods for detection of Helicobacter pylori, that is biopsy urease test. Gastric biopsies, usually enteral, are added to a substrate containing urea and phenol red. If Helicobacter pylori are present, the urease enzyme that they produce split the urea to release ammonia, which raises the pH of the solution and causes a rapid color change, yellow to red. The test may be falsely negative if the patients are taking proton pump inhibitors or antibiotics at the time. Histology. Helicobacter pylori can be detected histologically on routine, that is, gene-sustained sections of gastric mucosa obtained at endoscopy. The sensitivity is reduced if the patient is on proton pump inhibitors. This can be improved with immunohistochemical staining using an anti-Helicobacter pylori antibody. Third is culture. Biopsies obtained can be cultured on a special medium and in vitro sensitivities to antibiotics can be tested. Because there is now increasing incidence of clarithromycin resistance in major parts of the world. This technique is typically used for patients with refractory Helicobacter pylori infection to identify the appropriate antibiotic regimen, and routine culture is rare. Investigation of suspected peptic ulcer disease. Patients under 55 years of age with typical symptoms of peptic ulcer disease who test positive for Helicobacter pylori can start eradication therapy without further investigation. Endoscopic diagnosis and exclusion of ulcer is required in older patients. All gastric ulcers must be biopsied to exclude an underlying malignancy and should be followed up endoscopically until healing has taken place. How can we eradicate Helicobacter pylori? Eradication therapy. Current recommendations are that all patients with duodenal or gastric ulcers should have Helicobacter pylori eradication therapy if the bacteria is present. Many patients have incidental Helicobacter pylori infection with no gastric or duodenal ulcer. Whether all such patients should have eradication therapy is controversial. The incidence in the prevalence of gastroesophageal reflux disease and adenocarcinoma of the lower esophagus in the last few years is currently unexplained, but has been postulated to be linked to eradication of Helicobacter pylori. This seems unlikely but is not disproven. Depending on local antibacterial resistance pattern, standard eradication therapies in the developed world are successful in approximately 90% of patients. Reinfection is very uncommon, 1% in developed countries. In developing countries, reinfection is more common, compliance with treatment may be poor, and metronidazole resistance is high, about more than 50%. So failure of eradication is common. Examples of regimens are omeprazole 20 mg plus clarithromycin 500 mg and amoxicillin 1 gram all twice daily. Second, omeprazole 20 mg plus metronidazole 400 mg and clarithromycin 500 mg all twice daily. These should be given for 7 or 14 days. 2-week treatments increases eradication rates but increased side effect may reduce compliance. Bismethylate is not usually given in initial regimens because of the more complex dosing regimen and side effects. Quadruple therapy is used in resistant cases. Now quadruple therapy has been superseding the triple regimen. In eradication failures, bismethylate that 120 mg 4 times daily, metronidazole 400 mg 3 times daily, tetracycline 500 mg 4 times daily, and a proton pump inhibitor 20 to 40 mg twice daily for 14 days. Patients with the risk of bleeding or those with complication, that is hemorrhage or perforation, should always have a urea breath test or stool test for Helicobacter pylori 6 weeks after the end of the treatment to be sure eradication is successful. Long-term PPI inhibitors may be necessary if a rebleeding would be likely to be fatal. What are treatment options? Treatment options include proton pump inhibitors, H2 receptor blockers, mucosal protectors, sucralfate, antacids. There are 6 oral proton pump inhibitors currently available: omeprazole, rabeprazole, esomeprazole, lansoprazole, dexlansoprazole, and pantoprazole. Anyone can be used. H2 receptor blockers. 4 H2 receptor antagonists are available: cimetidine, ranitidine, famotidine, and nizatidine. Mucosal protectors. Misoprostol, that is a prostaglandin analog, belong to a class of medication called prostaglandin analogs. They work by mimicking the prostaglandins in the stomach, which protect the stomach lining. Antacid and sucralfate can be used. General measures. These are of top importance. Stopping smoking should be strongly encouraged as smoking slows mucosal healing. Avoid NSAIDs. Patients with gastric ulcers should be routinely re-endoscopied at 6 weeks to exclude a malignant tumor by confirming healing with biopsy if necessary. What are the complications of acid peptic disease? Number 1, hemorrhage. Second, perforation. Third is gastric outlet obstruction. Perforation of peptic ulcer. Suspected perforated peptic ulcer. The frequency of perforation of peptic ulceration is decreasing, particularly attributable to medical therapy. Duodenal ulcers perforate more commonly than gastric ulcers, usually into the peritoneal cavity. Perforation into the lesser sac also occurs. Laparoscopic surgery is usually performed to close the perforation and drain the abdomen. Conservative management using nasogastric suction, intravenous fluids, and antibiotics is occasionally used in elderly and very sick patients. These are those slides where hemorrhage has occurred. Hemorrhage usually presents with coffee ground emesis, hematemesis, melena, or hematochezia. Emergent upper endoscopy is diagnostic and therapeutic. Endoscopic therapy with thermocoagulation, that is bipolar or heater probes, or application of endoscopic clips that they are like to staples, is the standard of care for such lesions because it reduces the risk of rebleeding and number of transfusions and the need for subsequent surgery. If a patient presents with upper gastrointestinal bleed, then a protocol can be used. These patients should be resuscitated and managed in high dependency units. Brief history and examination. Note age and comorbidity. Monitor pulse and blood pressure half-hourly. Test for hemoglobin, urea, electrolytes, liver biochemistry and coagulation studies, blood grouping. Establish IV access with 2 large bore cannulae, that 14 to 16 gauge. If shocked, CVP line, blood transfusion. When stable, urgent endoscopy. Endoscopy will reveal what is the pathology. A patient is having bleeding varices, vasoconstrictors, or endoscopic therapy. Second, antibiotic prophylaxis. For example, ciprofloxacin 500 milligrams 2 times daily for 7 days. Prevent rebleed with propranolol or endoscopic banding. And if in spite of this, if rebleed, repeat endoscopy. And if these measures are inadequate, further bleeds occur, then tips can be used. On the other hand, if there is a bleeding peptic ulcer, IV bolus omeprazole 80 mg, then 8 mg per hour for 48 hours. If endoscopy shows stigma of recent bleed, endoscopy therapy. If there is again rebleed, re-endoscopy and therapy. If there is again rebleed, then surgical intervention can be done. These are various techniques which are used. These are the ulcers. Third complication, that is gastric outlet obstruction. The obstruction may be peripyloric, pyloric or duodenal. The obstruction occurs either because of an active ulcer with surrounding edema or because the healing of an ulcer has been followed by scarring. After gastric outlet obstruction, the stomach becomes full of gastric juice and ingested food and fluid, giving rise to the main symptoms of vomiting, usually without pain, as the characteristic ulcer pain has abated due to healing. Vomiting is infrequent, projectile, large in volume, and the vomitus contains particles of previous meals. On examination of the abdomen, there will be a suction splash. The diagnosis is made by endoscopy but can be suspected by the nature of the vomiting. On physical examination, there will be a suction splash may be heard in the epigastrium. In most cases, nasogastric aspiration will result in evacuation of a large amount, greater than 200 ml of foul-smelling fluid, which establish the diagnosis. Patients are treated initially with intravenous isotonic saline and potassium chloride to correct fluid and electrolyte disorders, an intravenous proton pump inhibitor, and nasogastric decompression of the stomach. Upper endoscopy is performed after 24 to 72 hours to define the nature of the obstruction and to exclude gastric neoplasm. Surgical treatment and its long-term consequences. Once the mainstay of treatment, surgery is now used in peptic ulcer disease only for complications including recurrent uncontrolled hemorrhage, the bleeding vessel is ligated, perforation which is overseen. No other procedure such as gastrectomy or vagotomy is required. In the past, two types of operations were performed. Number one, partial gastrectomy, second, vagotomy. Initially, this was a truncal vagotomy and required a gastric drainage procedure such as pyloroplasty or gastrojejunostomy. In later years, this was usually highly selective vagotomy or proximal gastric vagotomy, in which only the nerves supplying the parietal cells were transected and therefore no drainage of the stomach was required. What are the long-term complications of surgery? Number one, a recurrent ulcer. If this occurs, check for Helicobacter pylori. Rule out Zollinger-Ellison syndrome. It is a hypersecretory state in which multiple ulcers can be found in the stomach and duodenum. Malignancy needs to be excluded in all cases. Dumping. This term describes a number of upper abdominal symptoms, that is nausea and distension associated with sweating, faintness and palpitations. It occurs in patients following gastrectomy or gastroenterostomy. It is due to dumping of blood into the jejunum, causing rapid fluid shifts from plasma to dilute the high osmotic load with reduction of blood volume. Diarrhea was chiefly seen after vagotomy. Recurrent severe episodes occurred in about 1% of patients. Antidiarrheals are usually the treatment. Nutritional complications. In the long term, almost any gastric surgery, but particularly gastrectomy, may be followed by iron deficiency due to poor absorption, folate deficiency usually due to poor intake, vitamin B12 deficiency due to intrinsic factor deficiency, weight loss usually due to reduced intake. NSAID, Helicobacter pylori and ulcers. Aspirin and other non-steroidal inflammatory drugs deplete mucosal prostaglandins by inhibiting the cyclooxygenase pathway, which leads to mucosal damage. COX-2 specific inhibitors have less effect on the COX-1 enzyme in the gastric mucosa, but still produce gastric mucosal damage, but less than with other conventional non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Their use is limited by concern regarding cardiovascular side effects. Some 50% of patients taking regular NSAIDs will develop gastric mucosal damage, and approximately 30% will have ulcers on endoscopy. Only a small proportion of patients have symptoms, about 5%, and only 1 to 2% have a major problem, that is gastrointestinal bleed. Helicobacter pylori and NSAIDs are independent and synergistic risk factors for the development of ulcers. What will be the treatment? Number 1, stop the ingestion of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. A proton pump inhibitor should be given. The Helicobacter pylori eradication therapy, if Helicobacter pylori positive. In many people with severe arthritis, stopping NSAIDs may not be possible. An NSAID with low GI side effects at lowest dose possible, and if there is no cardiovascular risk, a COX-2 NSAID can be used. Prophylactic cytoprotective therapy, for example, with proton pump inhibitors or misoprostol for all high-risk patients, that is over 65 years, those with the peptic ulcer history. Proton pump inhibitor reduce the risk of endoscopic duodenal and gastric ulcers and are better tolerated than misoprostol, which causes diarrhea.